If you want to be more advanced in your tarot readings, you don't have to memorize the guidebook. Instead, integrate your understanding of archetypes, which are fundamental human experiences, with the artwork and the card. If you can do that, you don't have to memorize anything, and you'll find that your tarot readings are so much deeper and richer, and your understanding of the human condition is so much better. So today I'm going to show you how I learned tarot, basically going through history, literature, film, art, and my own personal experiences. And today the card that we're diving into is the Nine of Swords. So today I'm using the Tarot of Mystical Moments deck, but you can use any deck in your collection. That's a non-pip deck. I want you to take out your Nine of Swords and just look at the artwork. Don't bother with the guidebook. I just want you to look at the artwork and see what comes up for you naturally, intuitively. For me, when I look at this artwork, I see a woman who's sitting up in bed, probably having a night terror or sleep paralysis, and she's clutching herself, trying to comfort herself, and all over her body are wide-eyed, paranoid eyes, actively like looking and searching around her surroundings. And so this card is very much an illustrative representation of paranoia, of fear, of stress, of, we don't see any danger or threat in the artwork. Like, there isn't a monster hiding in the corner, but she's definitely not resting. She's definitely aware. She could be imagining it. And I think that's one of the interesting conversations around the Nine of Swords is the threat real or imagined? So when I think of paranoia and fear in a historical context, I think of the Salem Witch Trials. Now that happened in America, but they also did witch burning in Europe as well. And this was, of course, entirely based in paranoia and fear and mass hysteria. I want you to imagine, just temporarily, like put yourself in the position of medieval Europe or in Salem, Massachusetts. Imagine the fear, the anxiety, the paranoia. Is my neighbor a witch? Have they cursed me? Who's going to be executed?
We have found the witch, may we burn her?
How infectious fear can be, right? It doesn't just take one person, but if one person in the group is experiencing this emotion, it will infect other people. And when we look at like the mass executions of claiming people are witches, and just the paranoia and the anxiety and the fear and the fantasy that went way in a negative extreme, like in the witch trials, we see the destructive power of the Nine of Swords. So on one hand, if there is a threat, we want to be aware of it. We want to have situational awareness. But if you look through history, we can easily see how this fear became infectious. And sometimes when it's on a mass scale, it can get very, very out of hand. So I really like using Salem Witch Trials as an example to connect historically to this archetype. I would highly recommend researching the witch trials and researching the emotions and the thoughts and the fears that were going on, because they're very real. I mean, these were real humans. These were real women who were executed because of fear. Fear and paranoia is all it takes to cause mass damage, destruction, and murder. Now, on the flip side, a little bit of paranoia and mistrust is actually really important when it comes to our own personal safety. And a movie that I watched recently that I highly recommend, there's a Dutch version and American version. It's called Speak No Evil, and I'll put a timestamp in case you want to watch the movie. I probably won't put spoilers in here, but I don't want to ruin it for anybody. But it is an excellent example of what happens when we ignore this archetype, or when this archetype shows up reversed, right? So the premise of the movie, and I'll try to give you a brief summary without spoiling it, is this family befriends this odd couple, and they like want to be friends, but then there's some things that they do and say that are very odd. And this couple, they don't want to be rude, because to say to someone, I don't trust you, you're giving me a bad feeling, your behavior is really odd and it's making me feel like you're a threat, right? To actually confront somebody and acknowledge that you feel uneasy about them, can be seen as very rude in some societies and cultures. And actually, a lot of us, especially women, we will be complicit, we will be compliant.
More.
This is for you.
I'm a vegetarian.
I insist. I insist. I'll tell you, let's go.
We will actively ignore our own senses that tell us in danger because we're so afraid of being seen as rude or inconsiderate. And that is the whole beautiful premise of this movie, is that this couple, they ignore their own Nine of Swords senses. They ignore their own fears or worries, and they're like, I'm just, being paranoid. They absolutely dismiss those sneaking suspicions that something is wrong. And as the movie progresses, their boundaries get more and more eroded. The situation gets worse and worse and worse. And I won't spoil it for you, but it definitely is not safe. It's not a good thing.
He's only a child, for Christ's sake.
You can't talk to him that way. What is wrong with you?
Deny our own feelings because we don't want to be seen as racist or rude or sexist or disrespectful. It's very important that if you do feel threatened or unsafe, that you listen to that, and you listen to that especially when it comes to your own safety. Another real life application of this is like teaching children about stranger danger. Same with like avoiding risky behavior. Like, I'm not gonna walk down a dark alley at night by myself. I'm just not gonna do it. Is there a threat there? I don't know, but I'm not gonna risk it. I'm not gonna find out. When it comes to relationships, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, but this shows up in relationships a lot. And it's interesting because sometimes threats don't look like threats. There's a lot of wolves in sheep's clothing. There's a lot of predators and narcissists and abusers who intentionally make themselves look, as normal as possible. I mean, Nancy Brophy comes to mind. She looks like a sweet little grandmother. Like, she looks like the kind of grandmother that would bring cookies to a bake sale. She doesn't actually look threatening at all. And yet she's a convicted murderer who killed her husband in cold blood.
More about why police believe a local mystery writer shot and killed her husband last summer.
When she was arrested, she told officers, "You're arresting me? You must think I murdered my husband." Detectives later found this bookmarked page on the couple's iPhone account titled 10 Ways to Cover Up a Murder. In it, a suggestion that the best time to commit a crime is in the very early hours of the day when most people are asleep. Also, they found this essay Brophy wrote titled How to Murder Your Husband.
Or like Ted Bundy, right? He doesn't look like a serial killer rapist. He played the role of a very charming, clean-cut college student going to school to study law. Right there, if you look at true crime, which I might do some true crime analysis through the lens of tarot, there are a lot of predators and murderers and abusers who intentionally target people who turn a blind eye to their own senses. And I think that is why this archetype is such a tricky one to pin down. So when I get this card in a reading, a lot of people initially think that this is a bad card, and there's no such thing as a good card or a bad card when it comes to tarot. It's all about context. So in the context of don't get in the car with Ted Bundy, this is a good card. This is a good card. This is a card to tell people, if you feel like someone's behavior is off or odd, or someone is not being trustworthy, or you can't put your finger on it, you don't have any evidence, you don't have any proof, but really be situationally aware. Really listen to that fear response if you're getting it, right? But on the other hand, you don't want to be paranoid. You don't want to think that, the government is stalking you, or, like I said, Salem Witch Trials, that your town is full of witches that need to be executed and hunted. Sometimes I know some people that suffer from OCD and intrusive thoughts. And that is so exhausting. And intrusive thoughts are when the Nine of Swords have run rampant, the energy is too high. And intrusive thoughts are basically thoughts that come in our mind that say, what if there's a monster under my bed? What if the plane that I'm flying is gonna crash? What if today when I drive to work, I get hit by a semi-truck? What did I leave the oven on when I left the house? And these thoughts can be very exhausting, and they can be very debilitating. Now, how does this show up in relationships? Are there any red flags in the relationship that you're ignoring, right? Is there love bombing behavior? Is there manipulative behavior? Is someone, doing things that aren't quite making you comfortable, but you're ignoring that discomfort because you're so caught up in the excitement of the relationship? If you talk to any person who's been in a relationship with a narcissist or an abuser, it usually started out with them ignoring this energy in themselves, right? They disregarded the abnormal behavior, they made excuses for it, they rushed into something without fully knowing the person that they were dating. And predators and abusers do this on purpose. They find people who gaslight themselves, who mistrust their own instincts. They find people who they can basically pull the wool over their eyes and blind you so that you don't see their abuse until it's too late. I've had clients that had unhealthy levels of paranoia in their relationships, and I needed to have a frank and honest discussion with them about, hey, what are healthy boundaries in a relationship? Constantly thinking that your partner is going to cheat on you, or not trusting them when they go out, or thinking that they're doing something bad and you've got to resort to spying or stalking. That is an example where this archetype is out of control. This is not healthy, this is not normal. And if you feel genuinely like you need to resort to unhealthy behaviors in a relationship because you have such little trust, then that's a good sign that you need to take a break, a time out, sit back, and really evaluate if you are in a good mental state for a relationship, or if this relationship is the right one for you. A funny story. Well, it's not funny actually, it's only funny because it didn't happen to me. Let's just say that. I knew a guy, and he was dating this girl who was just a little bit controlling. And she definitely had the characteristics of the Nine of Swords archetype taken to the negative. And she was constantly texting him and tracking him, and he just found her very insufferable after a while and very exhausting. This archetype is so exhausting. Not only is it exhausting for the person who doesn't feel trust in their relationship, but you also exhaust everybody else around you. So he broke up with her. He broke up with her. It was a terrible breakup, super messy. She did not take it well. And he came to me for a reading, and I got this card as a card about advice for him on how to deal with this breakup. And I was like, look, I think this card is telling you that you really need to be careful. You really need to be careful about, the boundaries that you set with this crazy ex of yours. I really don't want you to trust her, is basically what I told him. I really want you to be situationally aware and careful and really, don't get complacent around her. I wouldn't trust her if I was you. Anyway, I saw him a couple months later and he had a crazy story to tell me. He typically worked regular hours, and he came home from work early one day and he saw her. She had broke into his apartment and was snooping on his computer. And he basically found out that she had secretly copied his apartment keys when they were dating. And while he was at work, she would break into his apartment and snoop around his stuff. And he checked the history on his computer and he could see that she was breaking into his apartment, logging onto his computer and checking his messages and his Facebook and, his search history and stuff. And when he walked in and confronted her, she basically went hysterical. And she claimed that he abused her, like he had to call the cops, and there was all sorts of drama. And she basically got caught. I mean, she was breaking into her ex-boyfriend's apartment, snooping on him and spying on him. This was a really good sign that he shouldn't have trusted her, right? Sometimes after a really bad breakup, maybe you should change your locks. Maybe you should change your passwords on your computers. Maybe you should be very careful about the way that you interact with this person, because they might tell the cops that you abused them when you didn't, right? That was when this card was a beneficial card for him, and it was really telling him, watch out. Watch out, this girl is not to be trusted. Okay, so you get the Nine of Swords in a reading. How do you handle this? Now, I just spent the last couple minutes explaining the fine balance between what a healthy dose of paranoia and self-preservation looks like and what a terrible and destructive and exhausting, debilitating level of paranoia looks like. So if you get it in a reading, how do you know what's what? How do you know if you should change your locks because you have a crazy ex? Or how do you know you're just having anxiety, intrusive thoughts, and your neighbors aren't actually witches that should be executed? So the first thing is, when I get this card in a reading, it's a good sign to stop and self-reflect. I look at the situation and I try to remove myself and really be objective about my behavior and my relationship dynamics. Am I being too trusting? Am I ignoring red flags? Or am I allowing anxiety and stress to alter my judgment? Is there a breakdown of communication between my instincts and my behaviors? Because when we get too stressed, when we let fear and anxiety and those nightmares, those night terrors get too high, actually it changes the chemicals in our brain and it makes it harder for us to think critically about a situation. It literally actually changes the chemical makeup in your brain when you're flooded with cortisol, stress hormones, and it makes it very, very difficult to look at a situation objectively and clearly and calmly. So if you can't really tell, sometimes the best thing to do is some meditative techniques, some grounding techniques, meditating, journaling, removing yourself from stress for a period of time to allow the stress hormones to settle and for you to feel am I making a clear and objective decision in this moment? Is this fear protective or is it destructive? Because that's a fine balance. That's actually really hard sometimes to tell. And I think, you know, sometimes if we talk to a third unbiased party, this is where that can be really helpful. Like if you're trying to pull cards on yourself and you're getting this, it can be very hard for you to like objectively step out of your situation and say, am I being reasonable right now? Or am I being naive? Or am I overreacting, right? It can be very, very hard to judge oneself. And so if you find yourself struggling personally with this archetype, and maybe you have fear, you have stress, you have anxiety, talking to somebody, you know, whether it be a friend or a professional or another tarot reader, talking to someone and just getting that feedback can be really, really helpful for you to ground yourself and see the situation from another point of view. So yes, this archetype is normal, it's natural. In fact, it's so beneficial when used appropriately. We don't want mass hysteria, we don't want paranoia, we don't want it to be intrusive thoughts destroying our lives. We want groundedness, we want safety, we want to be aware of stranger danger. We don't want to walk down dark alleys at night. But it's a fine balance to understand. So that is how I would get a deeper understanding of the Nine of Swords archetype. If you want to get your own understanding, I would highly recommend that you Google the Salem Witch Trials. I'll put some information in the link below. Watch the movie Speak No Evil. Great movie, by the way. Yeah, or even just study up on true crime, like Nancy Brophy and Ted Bundy. There's so many examples of, you know, people that are predators that don't look like predators, right? We need to have that balance. We need to be grounded. But at the same time, we can't be off our rocker in the land of paranoia and tinfoil hats. So it's all about groundedness. It's all about balance. This isn't a bad card. It's not a good card. It's just a card about navigating reality. And there are threats in reality. And how we decide to handle those threats, how we decide to react to our fears can teach us a lot about where we are on our spiritual journey, on our personal development, and our own personal safety as well. All right, that's all I had for today. Take care, everybody.